I'd like to pose a kind of a final question as we wrap to everyone to make a recommendation of what they would like to see happen, let's just say over the next 2 months, either what they envision happening or what they would recommend happening that might help lift this topic to a wider discussion that will help the final negotiations perhaps be more effective once the Republicans convene in Minneapolis. And Patrick, why don't we start with you, since we did in the beginning, and let you give us something here.
Well, in terms of something that would lift the salience of this topic to the American population, I mean, I think it's a difficult one. We know that generally Americans don't pay much attention to politics, and that they don't understand the process very well, and that was certainly revealed this time around. I think probably the best way to appeal to Americans on this topic is really to appeal to their sense of fairness. And I think order, as was mentioned several times, to make it clear that as the way the process currently stands, by no stretch of the imagination does every American have an equal amount of influence on the ultimate victor. And I think that's a principle that Americans will find troubling, and perhaps will be the impetus to get ordinary Americans to care about this issue.
I'd like to see the process obviously start later in the year. The holiday season and what took place this year with all the movement and shuffling and everybody trying to protect their interests, and then shortened. Those are two things that would help the process quite a bit, and then get that order to the process where there actually is a calendar that everybody's going to stay with and work at. And I think we're going to be going somewhere towards that direction. I think there's a lot of discussion to do different things, but in the end, I think we'll be somewhere towards that type of a process.
I pretty much agree with the Secretary. I'd like to see predictability in the system, as I said before, for candidates, for campaigns, for voters. I'd like to see it be orderly within the confines of what you can do in politics. I would like to see it start later. I'm agnostic, I think, on how long it lasts. I get Jim's point that as the Democrats got on toward the end, the interest was definitely intense. But orderly, predictable, and start later.
I would like to see the process start, in my preference, no earlier than the middle of February, and I'm talking about the early states in the middle of February. And then I think if states want to continue till the beginning of June, I'm okay with that. We're getting closer and closer to the election, and I do favor, I've heard people say, why not just get it over with in one day? I do think there's a great value to this playing out, to hearing more about what the candidates are advocating and just who they are. So I'm for that. But the other thing I really want to see is I want to see all the states follow the rules. That's fair not just to the candidates, it's also fair to the voters and to the states, as this time 48 states and half a dozen other jurisdictions that followed the rules. Fairness to all of those groups is important.
I think I have to agree with the Secretary. I think that shortening the process and beginning it later will be beneficial overall to the process. But I think strengthening the parties at the state level as part of the process, I think, is important, and we can do that by bringing some finality to whatever the rules are. One of the things that I've asked Council to prepare, and I'll be introducing at the Rules Committee, is a drop-dead provision for any plan that we may adopt, because the Democrats do have the ability to go later, and one of the things that you don't want to do is put your legislators in primary states and other states at a competitive disadvantage of saying they have one set of rules that the Republicans are following and another set for the Democrats. So I think that what we'll have, if the committee sees fit, of course, will be a drop-dead rule that would wipe out anything that we may adopt in September if we don't have some consensus coming out of the Democrats in a couple of years. So it'll be an automatic drop-dead, I think, provision in there.
Could I just ask a question? I know these are wrap-up statements, but that to me is something that I wasn't aware of, and it's a very interesting procedure. And I'm wondering if that could be divided into parts, one having to do with the starting date and another having to do with the process.
Yeah, sure could. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ron, speak for the mainstream media. What kind of a calendar would they like to see? I think,
The longer
I think
the
they're
better
very
and the
good.
more
But,
competitive.
at the same time, the media is a very real part of the democratic process.
I don't know if I could speak for the media. I think a couple of things. I think it's really difficult in June of 2008 to figure out what to do in 2012, with all due respect to the Republicans. I just think that there's a need for some reflection and some thought about what happened before we decide what's going to happen next. I think there should be a value placed on standardization to some extent, with, of course, a full appreciation for states' rights. But I think most people out there don't quite understand why it's so different every place, and why there are caucuses here, why there's a two-step there, why there's primaries here, and why it's. And I also think that, with all due respect to Iowa and New Hampshire, I think that there are a lot of people in the country who feel that there's a need to rotate this around, so there's some opportunity for people everywhere around the country to have the same go at going first, or going first ahead of everybody else. And I think with those guiding principles, you might find a system that more in the public sort of understand and appreciate and get.
Good.
But Ron, the success of Iowa and New Hampshire being first in the nation is really attributable to the media. That the attention that the media brings on those two states have really made those two states
And that goes back to the
important in
candidates. Because
yeah.
they would always ask me, why is Iowa so important? I said, because 6 candidates just opened offices down the street.
Right.
That's why, and 8 Democrats and 6 Republicans. I said, if they weren't here today, there's nobody here to follow. But for some
Giuliani
reason,
knows that.
yeah.
But if they weren't first, we wouldn't be there, and they wouldn't be there, and it'd
But
be.
here's the other
It's a
part.
chicken and
Here's
egg.
the other part of this. If some other state, if taking a small state, they're not accustomed to. If you took a bigger state, there won't be 6. There'll be 2.
That's right.
Because they'll buy the media markets out, and there's no Huckabees, there's no Dodds. There's even though they can't even, they're out of the game before it starts.
Good
Now,
point.
No, that's an interesting
and-
point.
And one last thing that has to be
But
said
is that true if you start with another small state?
why,
That's
without any experience or background or tradition, what makes you think that Delaware or Connecticut or Vermont is going to embrace this thing and turn it into this tradition? Things
can
just
tell
don't
he's
happen.
been through this
I have,
argument.
I have great
I
faith
think
in my
I-
fellow citizens in those great
Well,
states.
I do, but
Wyoming?
one of the
Wyoming
things-
tried that this
But one of the things that Patrick said here is most of the people aren't engaged. You're talking about passionate, engaged people, professionals. I'm not saying the other ones aren't.
One thing we haven't talked about is I wonder what the impact of what has just happened, particularly on the Democratic side, will be on 2012. I mean, was that an aberration because you just had these 2 unique candidates in this one unique race, as I think you argue, or really has something changed? And again, the enduring thing that will stick with me is that late in the game, going to these small towns in places like Indiana, South Dakota, and Kentucky, where there are thousands of people out in the streets at all hours of the day and night, excited and feeling good and involved and making a decision. And that, I think, is what both parties really want
And
me,
what I
because
think-
at the end of the day, so few people participate in this whole thing overall, in Iowa and in California, anywhere.
But I
Ron,
think
that's
we
a-
don't know yet.
That's a back-end phenomenon. We already had a tremendous race that pulled people out at the end. But in the beginning of the race, we had 15 plus candidates who were trudging around in the snows of New Hampshire and Iowa before anybody really paid attention to them. So there's the front end of this is earning the recognition and the support of individual citizens without having the media circus pulling all the attention into it. So there's a beginning point and an end point, and this might be a good point to end.